Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
Several sort of disparate things caught my eye over the past 18 hours or so, just in the course of my routine reading and listening. So, disparate I used because if you see each one separately, it looks like they are not connected. But if you start taking a journalistic view of what you are seeing and staying curious, as every journalist must be, then you can see that there are ends you can join. And when you join those ends, then a picture forms. That picture is what we are talking about. So one thing that finally became the spark that has inspired today's episode of Cut the Clutter on Taliban Chinese relationship. Right? First of all, it's much deeper than I had imagined. Second, the reasons for this are much more fundamental than I had thought. And third, the evidence of it is much stronger than we would have thought. And similarly, the contradictions of this, both moral and ideological of this, are also humongous. Now, what are the various things that happen and what is the final thing that provided the spark? So, final thing that provided the spark was a bunch of tweets. These were put out by Christina Scott. Christina Scott is a senior British diplomat. She's a senior British diplomat in Beijing. So she was like the number 2 in the British embassy in Beijing. And she posted a couple of pictures on Twitter where she said that look at this mosque. This mosque is in the state of Qinghai. Qinghai is one of the larger states in China. In Xining city in Qinghai state, this is not Xinjiang. Xining city in Qinghai state. Xinjiang, we know a lot of the stuff, awful stuff is being done to mosques there. So she was driving past this mosque in Xining city and she said, oh, this mosque does not look like what my 4-year-old travel guide shows. So 4-year-old travel guide, and you will see the screenshot of the story that we have done on it. See that story and see the picture and see her tweet also. If you see these, the 4-year-old screenshot shows a green dome. Also, it shows minarets. Now, all that's gone. It's like the Marriott someplace. Or it's like one of the bhavans in Delhi. Maybe one of the new bhavans as they'll be built. So it looks like newer construction. But it doesn't look like a mosque anymore. Now, this is not just any mosque. This is the Dongguan Great Mosque, one of the more prominent mosques in China. That has completely changed its character, shape, everything. And all this has happened over the past 4 years. And then she also mentioned that there is another mosque not far from it, the Ningguan Mosque, from which she says that from the dome, the crescent has been removed, right? And so we don't know where that mosque is headed. So this is the Chinese de-Islamization of their country, not just in Xinjiang, but elsewhere also. Everywhere. It's a 14th century mosque. It's not a new mosque. It's a 14th century mosque. Anyway, so that's one. The second thing I see is Zabiullah Mujahid, the spokesman of the Taliban. He made a statement. So he made a statement on how the Chinese are their most important friends. And the third thing I noticed that was late last night, just as I was trawling American media, that Fareed Zakaria, in his show on the CNN, there he talked about this odd Taliban-China relationship, and he took cognizance of the Zabiullah Mujahid statement. Zabiullah Mujahid actually said, China is our most important partner, and there are fundamental and extraordinary opportunities that Taliban's Afghanistan has with China. Very interesting statement. Normally you would have thought, oh, new government, they want recognition, they want the whole world to be nice to them. They've also said they will not allow their land to be used for terror against anybody, including India. India can carry on its development works in Afghanistan. They have no problem. But no, this statement is more significant than that. So Fareed Zakaria commented on it, and I will talk about that. So that's the third thing that happened, how he analyzed it, and I tend to agree with what he said. I will also share a link of his 6-minute clip with the description of this episode of CutTheClutter. Please watch it. Also watch it for his clarity of thought, whether or not you agree with him. But just watch for the clarity of thought. And I will repeat a few lines from it as we go along. Then China has become, now that happened a couple of weeks back. China has emerged as the first country, first major country anywhere, or in fact, first sovereign country to offer aid to the Taliban, although it's only $31 million worth in kind, not in cash, right? Also, the Chinese have been de facto recognizing the Taliban. Not even just now, but even June, the Chinese foreign minister himself received Mullah Baradar and a delegation led by him and posed for pictures with him. So that is a tacit recognition of a Taliban administration. Now, of course, a lot of the world is looking at some fig leaf or the other because they all know they have to deal with the Taliban. The Chinese have been the most proactive. Now, if you look at all this, you have to notice several things. One, it's quite clear that China is the country where Muslims are not being treated well. China is the country where I think anywhere in the world, Muslims are being treated physically, badly, and in a manner that their culture, their religion, that's all been obliterated now. So if at all they allow the practice of Islam, they are now even enforcing laws in many provinces whereby you cannot pray. If you're a Muslim, you cannot pray in Arabic. The prayers and Muslim teaching has to be in their own language. So this is also either a destruction of Islam or sinicization of Islam. And that is now being done at a systematic level everywhere. This is not being done in any country around Afghanistan, definitely not in any Islamic country, definitely not in America, definitely not in Europe. Okay, the Swiss may have voted to say no more minarets on their mosques, but nobody is taking minarets off and replacing them in something else as part of state policy. Also, new priests, new Maulvis are being appointed in these big mosques in China, and they are now giving out sermons in the Chinese language, not in Arabic. So in fact, a lot of the faithful are not going to these mosques. Now, it is this country with which the Taliban has the warmest relationship. And it's a Taliban spokesman. In Taliban's case, I don't have to say spokesperson because they will not let women speak for them, right? Women are supposed to be at home and produce babies. So, the Taliban spokesman has said that China is our closest friend and it is the relationship with China provides fundamental and extraordinary opportunities for the economy, etc., 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 politics, economy. Now, what is common between the ideology of the Taliban? This is the most ideologically Muslim regime in the world. We are not yet calling it a government because nobody has recognized this government. But this is the most ideologically Islamist regime in the world. They have declared themselves the emirate. They see themselves as the new caliphate, as the old caliphate, right? And that is the notion that they have. They want Sharia law, and they have imposed Sharia law with their own interpretation of the law today. Now, how come the friendliest country that they find is the country that is most systematically destroying Islam as state policy? Now, that is something that Fareed Zakaria latched on to in this statement of his, in this opinion of his. You should listen to him. But he says, for example, that look, how can the most ideologically Muslim regime in the world be great friends with a country that is now well known to be carrying out a cultural genocide of its Muslims? So how does this work? And then he goes on to say that that is because Islamic radicalism or radical Islam was never about religion. It was always about power. And then he goes on to explain how it is. And he says, look, radical Islam was always real. It was always evil. But the fact is that 20 years after 9/11, we still don't understand what this is, except that it remains there. It is still real, it is still evil, but it has lost the ideological argument. I wish I had made that point. Farid Zakaria is making this point, so I'm sharing with you. And how does he explain it has lost the ideological argument? He said, again, Farid goes on to say that, look, clash of civilizations, that is something that Samuel Huntington wrote, that Farid worked with in his academic life as a student, as a scholar. So the clash of civilizations that Huntington talked about was never a clash between the West and Islam. It was a clash within Islam. And how does he explain it? This was a clash between many of the regimes that ruled Islamic countries and Islamists in those countries. Now, many of these regimes happen to be dictatorial, say Egypt, for example, and yet they were relatively moderate because they were having to connect with the whole world. They were westernizing. They were not democrats. So somehow AlQaeda and others, Islamic radicals, made a calculation that people are unhappy with these dictators, whether it's the rulers of Egypt or whether it's the rulers of Saudi Arabia. The people are unhappy with them. They are dictators. So they want the Sharia law. And he said that's a mistake they made. Because one after the other, lots of polls have shown us that in Muslim countries run by dictators, what people want is more democracy. What they want is more freedoms. But Al-Qaeda's dream was that once they give the promise of Sharia, then all these hundreds of millions of Muslims across the world will join in, and they will then rebuild this entire new caliphate, including all the world's Muslims, run by Sharia law. Now that is something that is quite evident that no Muslim country wants right now. So he quotes, and I have seen other references also from people who research Al-Qaeda very carefully, including entire websites which track Al-Qaeda, that in the 90s, the first fatwa that Osama bin Laden issued, the essential fatwa, which set the agenda for Al-Qaeda, it talked about two kinds of enemies, near enemies and far enemies. So America was the far enemy. Far enemy was to be attacked and neutralized and weakened, not because you hated the far enemy. This is a wrong impression that many of us also made, that his war was with the Western world or Western values. No. He says in that fatwa that you have to fight the far enemy and weaken it because it supports the near enemies. Near enemies are people like rulers of Egypt, rulers of Saudi Arabia, etc. So his idea was, once you weaken the far enemy, the near enemies will get weakened, and then Al-Qaeda and this Islamist caliphate kind of ideology will spread all over. That has failed because Muslim countries have themselves rejected it. And then Farid goes on to explain that, look, exactly the contrary has happened in the last 20 years. Saudi Arabia, which used to send sort of very conservative, right-wing Islamist priests all over the world, their own version of the Quran, their own version of, it was spreading their own version of very conservative Islam. They are now doing exactly the opposite. And in fact, Mohammed bin Salman, whatever his flaws, he quotes an interview that Mohammed bin Salman gave out, where he says that, look, we can't spend 30 more years fighting these guys. We'll fight and finish them now. So this Saudi regime actually has gone after Islamic conservatism and conservative priests. So you may or may not like them, but they are not going in the direction that Osama bin Laden 20 years back would have thought they will go. Again, evidence that they've lost the ideological argument. UAE was one of the three countries that recognized the old Taliban. The other two were Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. Today, nobody has recognized the new Taliban. UAE hasn't. But meanwhile, UAE now has the warmest relations with Israel. Their ministers are traveling, their tourists are going into each other's countries, they are investing, following the Abraham Accords. And when those accords happened, brokered by Donald Trump, nobody in the Islamic world has broken out in rashes. Nothing. People are not out on the streets. In fact, even if I look at debate in Pakistan, which I follow very closely, there is a lot of talk now that why is Pakistan completely keeping out of all relationships with Israel. Now you have a situation where Saudi Arabia effectively has relations with Israel. we had done an entire episode of CutTheClutter in the past on how Netanyahu had flown secretly to one of their coastal resort towns and had a meeting with its rulers. So they've been talking. If Air India flight from day one, since it started flying to Tel Aviv, has been overflying Saudi Arabia. That wouldn't be possible earlier when Israel was boycotted by these countries. Similarly, other Gulf countries are recognizing Israel and establishing full relationship with it. But the Taliban, on the other hand, have said this is an illegitimate occupational arrangement. There is no country like Israel. They've come and taken the territory of the Muslims. This is not something that any Muslim country is saying. So Muslim countries don't want any of this. I mean, Pakistan may want it for other reasons because Pakistan has a blood feud mindset, very sharp tactical sense, but very narrow vision and very poor strategic sense. If it wasn't so bad, they would not have lost 60% of their country just because they are so driven by their blood feud with India. So they'll support anybody who they think will somehow, even if it does not go and attack India. I don't see the Taliban coming and attacking India, but at least it'll troll India. At least it's a finger to rub in India's eye. That's all. Cheap thrills ke liye. They might do it, but no Muslim country today wants a Taliban kind of administration. If at all, most Islamic countries today are afraid of something like this rising, because if it rises, it is no different from the caliphate or the ISIS that was rising in the Middle East. So that is why the Taliban, radical Islam, have lost the intellectual argument and ideological argument. And that's why this is not about ideology, this is about power. Now, I noticed two more things. I told you I noticed a bunch of things. There are two more. One, there is an article, 2019 article, which two of the young people who help me with research these days, that is Sukriti Vats and Amogh Rohmetra. So they spotted it. And this is an article from TRT World. TRT World is a Turkish media organization, large one, widely read across the world. TRT, the name is in Turkish, but basically this is Turkish radio and television. So don't ask me to repeat this in Turkish because I'll get the pronunciation wrong. So Turkish radio and television world. So TRT World had an article by Rupert Stone. Rupert Stone is an Istanbul-based freelance writer, but a domain specialist on the Middle East and South Asia. So he knows what's happening in Afghanistan also and what's happening in the AfPak region as well. So he, in this article, and I will share the article with you, he mentions that Taliban-China relations actually go back decades. And he says in the 90s, when the Taliban first took over, the Chinese were very afraid of the Taliban. So initial UN resolution sanctioning the Taliban, China was very happy to participate in it and bank it. So Taliban were sanctioned. Then in the course of time, it's possible that Pakistan played a broker's role in this. In the course of time, the Chinese began reaching out to the Taliban. So much so that at one point, and these are from Rupert Stone's article, so much so that at one point, the Chinese ambassador in Islamabad sought an appointment with Mullah Omar. And in preparation for that, a team of Chinese think tankers or track-to-walas landed, of all places, in Kandahar. And that work went on. In the course of time, the meeting also took place. In fact, in this article, he quotes from the memoir of Abdul Salim Zaif. Abdul Salim Zaif was the Taliban ambassador in Pakistan, who later had many complaints with Pakistan because Pakistan detained him after the Americans came in and their military operations in Afghanistan started. So in his memoir, in fact, he is much more critical of Pakistan than of China. And in fact, he speaks very warmly of China. So when the Chinese met the Taliban, Mullah Omar, etc., what was their ask? Their ask was, you turn over, you throw out all of these ATIM guerrillas. ATIM is East Turkestan Islamic movement. Essentially, this is the insurgent movement that affects Uyghurs and Xinjiang. And because East Turkestan is just a name of these traditional lands, which includes much of Xinjiang or Xinjiang. The Chinese are paranoid about this. So they wanted the Taliban to throw ATIM out, right? and to also hand over its people to them, or maybe deal with them as Chinese would deal with them, shoot them up, right? Taliban, what did they want? They wanted China to vote against the sanctions on Taliban now, renewal of the sanctions. So this did not quite happen because Taliban, at that point, Taliban thought that they were giving refuge to all these groups. So maybe there was also a sense of Pashtunwali, which is a tribal principle that somebody asks you for refuge, you can't say no, which is the excuse they use for giving refuge to AlQaeda or harboring AlQaeda. For whatever reason, Mullah Omar got ATIM to calm down, but he did not turn them over to the Chinese, nor did he exterminate them. So that is what got the Chinese. It got them something, but not so much. But because they did not oppose the renewal of the sanctions, all they did was abstained. But even then for China, it's a big change from backing the sanctions against the Taliban to just abstaining. And that is already 1999, by which time the ASPAC region is beginning to look like a threat to the whole world. The American Tomahawks, etc., are flying into that region, and there are reprisals being carried out there. So it is from that time that both have been friendly. In fact, it's just one of those coincidences. It was on 11th of September 2001, the 9/11, the original 9/11, that a Chinese delegation and the Taliban government signed a memorandum of understanding between them, bringing in some investments, trade, etc. It just so happened this was daytime in the subcontinent, right? By the time this day dawned in America, which was say 10, 11 hours later, then we know what happened, those planes flowing to here and there, and the whole world changed. But it was on 9/11 itself that China had signed an MOU with the Taliban. Also, if you read Pakistani literature and the literature also from elsewhere, Andrew Small, who sometimes occasionally writes for ThePrint as well, he wrote a book, The China-Pakistan Axis, where he mentioned that maybe Pakistan has this huge mine called Sandak mine, that maybe that has been used as a venue for secret talks between the Chinese authorities, Chinese diplomats, and the Taliban, because something has been going on between them. Again, Aynak, AYNAK. Aynak is a large copper mine not far from Kabul. Aynak, I mean, it is reputed to be the largest copper mine in the world, but a lot of these things are exaggerated. So let us see, proof of the pudding lies in the digging, right? So when the digging starts, we'll see what kind of ore it is, how good it is, how remunerative it is. So let's also not exaggerate, but the fact is, it is potentially a very large copper mine. Copper is in short supply in the world. It's a very valuable mineral. It also so happens that Aynak is not far from, in fact, it does encompass really valuable ancient Buddhist sites. So there are also archaeological concerns about it. Now, Chinese don't need the Taliban to give this mine to them. In fact, this is something that we in India did not notice adequately. In 2007, the Afghan government had already contracted the Chinese to exploit this mine. So the Chinese think now that with a friendly relationship with the Taliban, because the Chinese can give the Taliban that no one else can. And that something is huge amount of economic aid. Pakistan can't give it. Pakistan itself is getting huge amount of economic aid from China. China's CPEC investments in Pakistan will not be viable, sustainable. Forget all that, will not be protectable, right? Will be vulnerable unless they have a friendly relationship with the Taliban. Afghanistan is a country of less than 4 crore people, widely spread out. So for the Chinese, it doesn't really hurt them so much if they bring some money to Afghanistan. Of course, the Chinese give you nothing for free. They will have a lease over some mines or some real estate, etc., or they will want CPC extended to this area. Already, as we can see, Taliban is talking about the transport of commodities, that is gas and oil, etc., through their territory. So they've also said that they are happy with the TAPI, that is Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India pipeline, if it gets built, etc. So Taliban are looking at money as well. This is a different kind of Taliban this time. This is not the Taliban of the past. And similarly, I noticed one more article in the BBC by John Simpson. John Simpson is the BBC's World Affairs editor. He's a veteran. He's been there, I think even longer than I've been around in journalism. And if I may just share a secret with you, Walk the Talk, the show I used to do earlier for NDTV, was partly, just a little bit inspired by something that John Simpson hosted those days on the BBC called Simpson's World. Except that he carried a microphone with BBC written on it and he went from person to person. Walk the Talk became informal, but but an interview with one person. So John Simpson has also written this article on the BBC where he says that the one country that can bail out Afghanistan from all these troubles is China. And one country that can, one, provide opportunity to China, economic and strategic opportunity, plus also protection from Islamic insurgencies and radical Islam in its own territory, is also the Taliban. So once again, we come back to the earlier conclusion that radical Islam, even Talibanism, is not about Islam. It's not about religion. It's not about ideology. It's about power. And now it's also about cash.